All right. Hello, everyone. Uh, Welcome to another Wednesday night. Good to see some of you already there in the comments, it looks like. Cool to see. Seems Owen, Abisai, Ellie, Hannah, all you guys there already. Already commenting, already active. That's good and everything. But yeah, so welcome to another Wednesday night of our youth group live stream here on our YouTube channel. Let's see. So give a couple minutes for people to get on here and everything. So just give kind of a moment here. Not too much by announcements. Well, I guess there are some announcements for the high schoolers at least, and I'll talk about this at the Zoom meeting tonight as well. We have our drive-through thing we're going to be doing on Sunday. Okay, this Sunday. We're still working out the time exactly with the leaders. I forgot to ask earlier about this, but we're working that out, and we should have a time to kind of put in there for you guys at our Zoom meeting. All right, so we'll have details on that, and I'll text it out in case you're not there at the Zoom meeting and everything. But this Sunday, for the high schoolers, we'll be doing a drive-through thing at the church. So we'll give you the time, and you'll kind of drive through, and we'll have it'll be a good chance to just at least see you guys, right, and be able to also we'll have a little something for you guys as well. And yeah, just a little opportunity, right, to be able to see each other in light of all this and everything. And so, because as you can tell, we're still where we're at with everything. The guidelines haven't really shifted much at all or anything. And so this is kind of where we're still at and everything, unfortunately. So, but that's what we're going to be doing Sunday. All right. So pass the word along, okay, to people. And I'll be texting that out on Flocknote as well on different things. And so kind of set that time aside. Hopefully you can make it so we can at least see you guys in some form or fashion, even if you're in your cars and all that. It'll be a good time to at least see you guys and everything. Okay. I think that's like the main announcement going on. All right. So yeah. So give a couple more minutes for people here to get on here and before we start rolling with the lesson and everything. I don't know who all else is out there. I always like to hear who all is there. I know the ones I already mentioned so far, but anyone else out there that's watching and everything before we get started. Or if you guys have any questions of things coming up, there's that too. You can ask and do my best to answer and all that. Oh, another announcement. Sorry, I don't know if you guys saw it or not, but our church will be doing an outside service on Saturday. Okay, so Saturday, I believe it's 7 p.m. In the smaller grass area, the one in between like the buildings and all that, right, with the trees. I think it'll be at 7 p.m. They're going to be doing an outside service. Okay. So you guys can go to that, right? Like, and hopefully you can go with your families to that and enjoy that and everything. So that's this Saturday at 7 p.m. Our church is doing an outside service. Okay. And they'll still be filming. They're still going to film the service and everything to post for Sunday and everything as well. Okay. But that's another option that we're trying out, okay, this week. So 7 p.m. at the church this Saturday, okay, for kind of the main service will be that way. All right. Cool. All right. So, all right. So if you have your Bibles, we'll get started now. Hopefully it's enough time for people to get on here and everything and get connected. But yeah, so if you have your Bibles, hopefully you can turn now to Matthew, all right, the book of Matthew. We'll be continuing through, okay. As you can see on the bottom of the screen, it's opposite. Let me see. There we go, right there. We're in Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12 today, so doing kind of the first half of chapter 2, okay, as we're making our way through Matthew. And so let me pray before we get into this, all right? And then we'll dig into these 12 verses, all right? Lord, I just thank you so much just for these nights, Lord. I know these are not the nights that we were expecting coming into summer and everything, Lord, but I do just pray that you would be still using these nights to hopefully encourage us, to build us up, Lord, to still make the most of the time we're able to gather together, even if it is online through YouTube and through Zoom and other things, Lord. And just pray that you'd still be working in us to grow us in our faith, Lord, grow us in our relationship with you, and grow even our relationships with one another, Lord, and that we'd be able to encourage one another, build one another up through these times, Lord, that we would come with hearts that really do want to hear the teaching of your word, that want to really encourage one another, build one another up. And so please be with us in this time, Lord, and just pray that ultimately you'd be glorified and honored in it. And just pray that you just be at work tonight as we study your word, to give us wisdom, give us understanding in how we hear your word, and that we'd be looking to really apply it, that it would convict us where we need convicting and bring change where change is needed in our lives, Lord. So please be at work in us. And I just pray these things in your son's name. Amen. All right. So like I said, we're in Matthew chapter 2. We're going to be looking at these first 12 verses. Okay. And this is, again, probably kind of similar to last week a little bit, right? As we talked about Jesus' birth. This is probably another passage you guys are probably somewhat familiar with. All right. So another kind of familiar story of Jesus's life, where we often hear this around Christmas time, right? Like we have the wise men, right? That's who we're going to be talking about tonight, is the wise men. All right. And kind of their visit and everything with that. And so again, another kind of familiar probably story from scripture. And again, hopefully as we approach stories like this, right, that we wouldn't approach it as like, oh yeah, I've heard this before. Oh yeah, like I've heard those Christmas songs and stuff. Like I know all about this. Like, and we just kind of like brush it aside as if like, yeah, I don't really need this. I got everything, right? Hopefully we fight that temptation, right? Like, especially as we're going through the life of Christ, like I think that could be an easy temptation to have. It's just kind of like, oh, okay, I've heard the story, right? But actually, like, hopefully we come to each of these stories with kind of fresh eyes, looking to see like, in like what exactly God wants us to learn from this, right? And even if it is something that maybe you've heard all this before, right? Like, hopefully, even if that happens, that we would view that as, hey, that's a good reminder, and it probably is still something I need to work on, right? Like, it's probably still talking about something I need to work on. And so hopefully we approach it like that, right? And so, and honestly, like, I think hopefully as we go through this, we'll also point out some things that maybe you aren't as familiar with, right? And so, and that's what we're going to try to do tonight. And I think that's so good with this kind of section, because I think there's a lot of kind of wrong thoughts about the story of the wise men and everything. And so hopefully we can work through this and kind of get what Matthew wants us to get, what his focus is in this section. All right. And so, right, before we jump into the text itself, right, the theme of Matthew, right? If you guys remember, what is it? It is Jesus, the King and Messiah, right? So we have our little handy graphics that we'll be utilizing here. But yeah, as you can see, the theme of Matthew, what he's trying to get his point across is Jesus is the King, right? He's the Messiah. And we've seen that already in Matthew, starting right away in chapter 1 with the genealogy showing that he is the rightful king, the rightful heir to the throne and everything. All right. So that's our theme here that we're going to be discussing. And again, we see that even today, right? Because if you have the handout, again, handout in the comments below, or not comments, description below. All right. You have the link to the handout there. Hopefully you guys already have that. But the title, right, is Worship of the True King. So we're still coming back to this element of kingship, right, that Matthew is still in this story, right, is concerned about showing Jesus as the true King and Messiah, right? Like that's what he's going to show in this, all right, in the story of the wise men, all right? So let's get into this, all right? Let's get into this. So we're going to be looking at these first two verses, all right? And as we look at these two verses, we're going to see the wise men arrive, okay? The wise men arrive. So they kind of arrive here on the scene. Matthew gives the setting of what he's about to talk about. All right, so let's look at these first two verses in chapter 2 of Matthew. It says, "Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, 'Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him.'" All right, so we have these first two verses, all right, where, again, Matthew kind of setting the stage here, where we're picking up, right? We left off chapter 1 with Jesus being born, right? Talked about like the virgin birth a little bit, right? Like last week and everything. And we left off with, and Jesus was born, right? And Joseph called his name Jesus, right? And we left off there. And so now we're picking up. It says like after Jesus was born. Okay. And the first thing I wanted to kind of bring up here is that this isn't like right after his birth, right? I think that's another thing where we think of when we think of like the story and Christmas and all that, is like you have like the shepherds and you have the wise men, right? Like you have like, if you have like the nativity sets, right, in your house, maybe you have those where you have Jesus there and you have the shepherds there and you have the wise men there, and they're all kind of there at the same time. And the reality is like this is happening after, right? Quite a bit after, right? Months, even maybe like a year or so after, right? Jesus' birth. We don't know exactly. But from later passages that we'll see next week, probably anywhere from kind of, I don't know, up to 2 years potentially, right? Like, so it's been some time, okay? So it's not right after, okay? It's not at that same time like the shepherds are there and all that. So you have in Luke, right, talking about Jesus' birth, you have the shepherds show up and all that's happening in Luke. That's like right when Jesus is born, right? But the wise men, that's like some time has passed, all right? A little bit of time has passed. So that's the first thing we need to notice, okay? And so what we see though, like, and so with this, right, like Matthew doesn't go into too much detail about Jesus' birth, right? Like Luke has more of the actual details of how he was born, right? Like Matthew kind of gives the lead up of like the virgin birth, showing all that, but then also essentially just summing up like, and then she gave birth, right? Like, and that happened. And now Jesus has been born, okay? And so that's where we're picking up in chapter 2. But let's point out some things here. First off, he does mention, right, like that Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea. Okay, he's born in Bethlehem of Judea. And so that's important for us to understand, not just for the events about to transpire, right, in this chapter, but again, it's important for Matthew's purpose in his gospel. Okay, and as we're going to see, like Jesus' birthplace is significant, all right, because once again, it points to his identity as the Messiah, right, as the one that the Old Testament was pointing to, okay, but it's also like the birthplace of Bethlehem itself, right, like is significant, okay, as well, because who else was of significance from like the Old Testament? Do you remember that was born like in Bethlehem? Do you guys remember? David, right? King David, okay, was also born in Bethlehem. All right, he was from Bethlehem and everything. And so the significance here of like why Jesus was born here, right, in Bethlehem, because you would naturally think the king, right? If Jesus is the king, where would you expect him to be born? Where most of the other kings were born, which was in the capital, Jerusalem. Okay? And so you kind of expect that, right? But he's born in Bethlehem. Why? Because it makes this connection back to David, where he is essentially this new David that is coming. Okay? That it's almost kind of like this reset, right? Like it's starting fresh, right? Like that Jesus is this new David. Okay? And so he's born in the same place David was born. Okay? So there is significance in why Bethlehem is the spot, right? And so it fulfills prophecy, as we're going to see a little bit later, right? But it's also significant because it's making, again, that connection back to David to show what? That Jesus is the king, right? Like it's this kingly theme that keeps popping up, right? And that's not accidental, right? It's all on purpose. And notice here, right? So he mentioned Jesus was born in Bethlehem, Judea, in the days of Herod the king, right? So we have this mention of Herod the king, Herod the Great, okay, which we're going to see a little bit more about him in a second here, but just keep that back in your mind for a second, that he's reigning at this time, right? And everything. And so, okay, so the scene is set, right? Like Jesus is born in Bethlehem. This is happening after that. Herod's reigning. What happens? Now we have these men, these wise men, or some translations might say magi, right? Like they come on the scene. Okay, they come on the scene. It says, what? Behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem. Okay, so you have these wise men come on the scene. All right, and first off, we could talk about a little bit of like who are these wise men, right? Because I think again, there's a lot of speculation. There's a lot of different theories out there of who these people are and what's going on here, how many of them there are, and different things. Okay, and so really, the term like wise men or magi, right? Like that term used here, okay, really was connected with like foreign officials, okay, foreign officials or advisors, right? Especially like in the Babylon or Persian kind of empire, right? Back in that time, we see that this term is used of individuals who were advisors or officials, and they had some interest in like astrology or dreams or magic or different things like that. Like they were kind of involved with that, but it wasn't just like this kind of weird outsider group or something, right? But rather they were actually very important and like politically involved, right? Like where, especially like if you read in like the book of Daniel, right, where you see like those like magicians or enchanters, like that kind of term like magi is used there as well. And it's like these officials, these advisors of the king, right? And the king valued their opinion, right? And some even argue that Daniel himself was actually a magi or a wise man, right? And so we actually have, like, for example, like in Daniel 4:9, Belshazzar here, that's like Daniel's Babylon name that was given to him, right? The king refers to him as what? The chief of the magicians, right? So he is like the chief of like the wise men, okay? And so some then speculate like that Daniel was actually like part of that group as well. And so you have these officials, right? Who are also kind of like wise astrologers, right? Like, and so that's who these people likely are. So it says from the east, right? Probably from that area of like Babylon or Persia. Okay. And so, so that's kind of what the wise men and magi are. Okay. So that gives us kind of this idea. They're not necessarily kings, right? We hear the song like We Three Kings, right? They're not necessarily kings. Okay. But they are probably like advisors, officials. They're not just kind of like nobodies or random people, right? Like they have like a little bit of significance about them. Okay. And speaking of We Three Kings, we also need to bring up the fact that we often think like there's three wise men, but if you read these verses, right, like it makes no mention of how many wise men there actually were. Where do we get the number three? It's because of the gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, right? And so for whatever reason, people have assumed, oh, there's three gifts. That means there's just three wise men. Okay. And even tradition, like people have come up with names for these wise men and all that. Okay. I don't remember what their names are. But people have come up with that as well. Okay. However, go with me here. Think through this, right? If these guys, right, you have these wise men who are traveling from like the Babylon, Persia area, like it's a good distance, right? It's not just like a stroll in one day, right? That's like a journey. That's a trip, okay? Heading all the way to Israel. And you're coming, right, to this foreign nation, and you have a bunch of gold, like it says frankincense and myrrh, like very expensive, valuable things, some precious items that you're bringing with you. Do you think they probably also brought some form of like protection, right? Some sort of like guard or some people with them? I think that's very likely. And so first off, like there's likely more than just three. I mean, maybe there was three, but likely more than three wise men themselves. Plus, you probably also have like some soldiers or people to guard them, right? Because remember, they're like advisors, they're officials, okay? Like they're not just going to go with like a bunch of money and just kind of like, no, see what happens, right? It's like, no, like they're going to take like a guard. And so there's probably like a pretty large caravan of people, okay? So this isn't like a small little thing. This is something that would draw attention, right? Like, and that's where you kind of see, as we're going to see in these verses in a second here, where the events end up like reaching the ear of the king, right? If there's just like a couple guys like kind of walking around, like asking some questions and different things, like people might not take that too seriously. But if you suddenly have like this huge caravan of people, of like foreign officials and soldiers and different things coming into your town, that draws some attention, right? That gets people kind of like, ooh, what's going on, right? Like, who are these people, right? And so that's the scene of what's going on here, okay? And so in verse 2, we get kind of their purpose of like, well, why are they here? Why are they coming to Jerusalem? And he says, we see their purpose by the questions they ask, right? It says, they were saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. Okay, they have come to worship the newborn king, right? They have come to worship the true king that has just been born, he who has been born King of the Jews. Okay, and the kind of grammar there, the saying, like, means they were like continually asking this, right? They're like just going around like, hey, where's this guy born King of the Jews? Hey, where's this guy born King of the Jews, right? Like, and causing probably some sort of commotion where people are like, wait, what? Like, what's going on, right? And so they're asking about it. It's kind of making that commotion, making things a little crazy, all right? And so we don't really have like here like exactly how they knew that like Jesus was born. All we have is Matthew says what? They saw his star when it rose, okay? And we don't really have any indication of like why or how they associated that star with like the birth of the Messiah exactly, okay? But I think part of this, right, if we remember that Daniel, right, the prophet Daniel in the Old Testament was kind of affiliated with this group of wise men, not these people exactly, that was like hundreds of years before, okay? But kind of that group of people, the wise men, if he was affiliated with them in Babylon, that would mean it's not far-fetched to think that that group of people would have been familiar with Daniel's writings, right? And potentially even some more of the Old Testament itself, right? But especially the writings of Daniel. And even in Daniel, you have some timings of when the Messiah was potentially going to come, okay? And so that would have given them some insight of like, hey, around this time, something's going to happen. And then probably, right, around the time they're thinking, looking, they see this star or whatever, and we'll talk about that in a second, this star, and that, for whatever reason, seems to signal to them, like, hey, that Messiah has been born, right? Like, that king's been born. Let's go, right? Let's go worship him. Let's pay homage to him, right? Like, that's their mission, right? That's why they're going, all right? And another thing I want to correct from some of the songs, even though they saw this star, they weren't necessarily like following it, right? Because notice where they end up. They end up where? Jerusalem, right? Not Bethlehem, where Jesus is. Okay, so at this point, they end up in Jerusalem because, again, naturally you think, hey, king born, capital, let's go there. Okay, but we see that's not the case, right? So that's why they're asking, where is he? Where is he born, right? Like, what's going on? All right. Okay, so then now let's talk briefly about this star, okay? And that's, again, another thing where there's so much speculation. There's so many different theories thrown out there, so many scientific explanations or different things brought up of what the star was, what's going on. And the reality is we don't really have in Scripture anything concrete or in detail what exactly it was, right? However, I do think while it's possible it was like a literal star, I think probably more likely it seems to be probably like God's glory kind of appearing as a star type of thing, right? Like some call like the Shekinah glory, right? Where you see God, his glory is often throughout like Scripture pictured as like a bright blinding light, okay, or a bright light. And so I think potentially what that is his glory that kind of being manifest as like some sort of star or has the appearance of a star, okay? Because again, it seems like later on as we see, like it leads them and stuff. So it doesn't, I don't know, there's possibility it's a literal scientific explanation, all of that, which is possible. I've seen some of those. However, I think personally for me, I think the more convincing thing is that it is like God's glory being manifested as a star, this bright shining light that is leading them in this way. And others also suggest maybe it's an angel. Actually, I've seen arguments for that as well, and that's also a possibility. Where again, angel, kind of that bright light. We see that even in Luke, where there's like a bright light and stuff what's associated with angels. But I think that's where I would kind of land, is more that it is kind of that expression of God's glory in that way, right? Hopefully that makes sense. That's one of the things I don't like about not actually being able to see you guys in person, is I want to make sure those things are making sense. Hopefully it is. All right. And so that's what it is. But of more like significance, we can get into the bogged down in the details of, okay, what exactly is the star, like all these different things. But what's really significant about that, right, is this mention of a star itself, right? Because really it connects us back to the Old Testament again, right? Which shouldn't surprise us with Matthew. He's always making these connections back, all right? And it connects us back to actually Numbers 24, verse 17, all right? Numbers 24, verse 17. And this verse contains a prophecy about the coming king and Messiah, okay, who will come from Israel. And so notice here this verse, and the thing got cut off, so I don't have the reference. It's Numbers 24, verse 17, where it says, I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. So again, Numbers was taking place a long time before the time of Jesus. And so the person speaking here, Balaam the prophet, right, like is essentially saying like, hey, I see this guy, but it's not close. Like he's coming in the future type of thing, right? It says, behold him, but not near. And notice what he says, right? A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. It shall crush the forehead of Moab and break down all the sons of Sheth. Okay? And so we have this prophecy of this one's going to come. And people understood this reference to this star that comes out of Jacob as referring to this Messiah, right? Like this one who we've talked about, who's going to come through the Old Testament to deliver his people and all that. And so people understood like this star imagery being associated with the Messiah, to the point where there were even some kings that like printed stars like on their currency and used that as their symbol to try to claim like I'm the Messiah type of thing, right? But what we see here, why Matthew brings up this star, is to make this connection back here, right, to Numbers 24:17. Okay, that this is the one, right? This is that star that's coming out of Jacob. It's Jesus, right? Like it's the Messiah. He's here. Okay. And on a side note with this, right, like something significant about this verse in particular as well. Notice here it talks about like the scepter coming out of Israel, and also like, and it shall crush the forehead of Moab. And so we have this imagery of like a scepter, someone ruling with a scepter. You have someone crushing the head of someone. Hopefully that rings some bells in your mind of some other Old Testament passages, right? Like, for example, Genesis 49:10, another messianic prophecy passage where it talks about the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff between his feet, right? Until tribute comes to him, and to him shall be the obedience of peoples. And this is another messianic prophecy of that, talking about this Messiah, this one who's going to rule and is going to bring peace, okay, is going to come from the line of Judah, right? And he's going to have the scepter. And so you have that, all right? So notice here, right, like in the Numbers passage, this mention of a scepter, connecting back to that this star, this person, is also going to fulfill that Genesis 49:10. And then also, right, this crushing the forehead of Moab, crushing the head of someone, that should hopefully make you think of Genesis 3:15, where God promising this first mentionings of like a Messiah, right, where it talks about, I'll put enmity between you and the woman, right, talking to the serpent, right, and between your offspring and her offspring, he shall bruise your head or crush your head, and you shall bruise his heel or crush his heel, right? So again, so Numbers is picking up, right? Notice that phrase, he shall crush your head, crush the head of the serpent. Now here, it shall crush the forehead of Moab, right? Like, so this star, this one is going to fulfill. He's going to be that same person as Genesis 49:10 and Genesis 3:15. And so Matthew, in bringing up the star here, is making that connection, not just back to Numbers 24, right? but also all the way back to Genesis to again show this is the one, this is the Messiah, this is the true King has come. Okay, he is here, right? And that's Matthew's point. That's why he's bringing up this star. And so hopefully you guys are able to track with that thinking. All right, track with that. But that's what's going on. And so we see, again, Matthew bringing up this huge deal with all the things he touches on. There's no accidents here, right? Like Matthew is purposeful in what he writes to show this is the true King. This is the Messiah that we've been looking for. Okay, and these wise men understand it. Okay, and so I know this was all a lot of information about these couple verses. Okay, but like let's bring it back a little bit. So what you have here, right, is the setting after the birth of Jesus. Okay, you have these foreign officials, these wise men coming with a large caravan of people, probably coming to Jerusalem, asking, "Where is he who was born King of the Jews?" Right, like where is this person? Okay, and they want to worship him, they want to pay homage to him, right? Which is again kind of a common practice back in that time, where like a birth of a king or someone would happen, or a new king is reigning. Foreign officials would come to like make peace, right? Like offer gifts and stuff and make peace with this person. And so these wise men are coming to essentially, right, like make peace with this new king, okay, that's been born. All right, so very significant verses here. Okay, so we'll move through these other verses faster, all right? But hopefully we have a better picture of like what's going on here, right? Who these wise men are, what's happening, all right? So let's look, right, this next section, verses 3 through 6, we're going to look at Herod's response, okay? So we saw the wise men arrive. Now we see Herod's response to all of this, all right? Let's look at this starting in verse 3. It says, "When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. They told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet, and you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Okay, so like I said before, this caravan, these wise men, right, are creating some sort of commotion to the point where Herod, the king, right, hears of it, that this comes to Herod, right, what these people are asking, what they're saying. And notice Herod's response. He's troubled by this. He's troubled. Okay. Which you can ask, like, well, why is he troubled? Because you have to remember, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago when we're kind of introducing Matthew and kind of the historical setting there, that Herod, right, was not a rightful heir to the throne. He wasn't born king of the Jews, right? Like he wasn't part of the royal line, right? He was actually like a usurper of the throne, right? He's not supposed to be on the throne, okay? So that would trouble him, right? And the fact that, and so you have someone, right, in contrast to him who was born king of the Jews, right? Whereas he's kind of usurped that role. And then you also have to understand the fact that what? The wise men didn't go directly to Herod, which might suggest that what? Like they don't really recognize him as that rightful king. Okay. And so that would kind of be very troubling for him. Okay. And you have to understand then kind of the next part of the verse, right, where it talks about not only was Herod troubled, but also it says all Jerusalem with him. Okay. And you can kind of ask like, well, why is all Jerusalem troubled, right? Shouldn't they be wanting this Messiah and all this stuff, right? Like, yeah, I'm sure they wanted the Messiah and all that, but they were more troubled, not with like this kid being born, but rather they were troubled by what's Herod going to do, right? Because you have to understand at that time, like Herod, okay, especially at this time later in his life, was a very paranoid king, okay, very paranoid. And any semblance of threat to his authority or power, he took very seriously and tried to eliminate it, okay, where he even killed a couple of his own sons because he thought they were trying to usurp the throne, okay? And so very paranoid king, and he's not adverse of taking it out on people who might not actually be involved. And so I think people are like, okay, like this isn't good. Like Herod's a little upset and troubled by this. And so let's, I don't know what's going to happen. Okay, so that's why not only is Herod troubled, but Jerusalem with him. Okay, is because they're kind of like, what's going to happen? All right. But what does Herod do? He summons. It says all the chief priests and scribes of the people, right? Like of the area, kind of like the religious leaders of that time from the different sects, like the Sadducees and the Pharisees, right? Kind of brings them all to kind of ask them, right? Like, where was the Messiah to be born? Where is he supposed to be, right? Which shows that, again, Herod's probably not very familiar with the Old Testament and all that. He's the one leading Israel. Not a good thing, okay? But they tell him what? That he's supposed to be born in Bethlehem of Judea, okay? That the Messiah is supposed to be born in Bethlehem. And then they quote Micah 5:2, okay, where it says, and you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judea, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler. Okay, and so they quote Micah 5:2 there as that evidence that, yes, he is, like, that's where the Messiah is supposed to be born, is in Bethlehem. Okay, and so they're familiar, right? They're familiar with this prophecy to the point where they can quickly kind of tell him, like, yeah, that's where he's supposed to be born. It's in Bethlehem. All right. And so, but Matthew, right, like when he kind of brings up this verse, Micah 5:2, he also adds on that last phrase, if you see it there in your text, like, who will shepherd my people Israel. All right. And that phrase isn't in like Micah 5:2. Okay. However, you have verses around Micah 5:2 that kind of speak of this person is going to shepherd Israel and stuff. Like, for example, just a couple of verses later in Micah, you have, speaking of the same individual who's going to come out of Bethlehem, right? Like it says, like, and he shall stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, right? He's going to shepherd the people. And even more directly, some people suggest that Matthew is actually potentially combining Micah 5:2 as well as 2 Samuel 5:2, a couple 5:2s, all right? 2 Samuel 5:2, the second part here, where it is said to David, like, that the Lord said to you, speaking to King David, that you shall be shepherd of my people Israel. Okay, and so some people say Matthew might be connecting this in Micah to, again, make that connection again back to who? David, right? Making this connection, right? That, again, emphasizing Jesus is that king, and he's going to be the shepherd of the people. Okay, just like David was at the beginning, Jesus is doing it then, right? Like, he is that new David. He will be that new king, that new shepherd of Israel. Okay. And so that's what, again, Matthew's trying to get this point across, hammer this point home, right? That's what's going on. All right. So we see this happen. Herod finds out where the Messiah is supposed to be born. And so then he kind of develops a plan, right? And that's what we see in the next couple of verses. Herod's plan in verses 7 through 8. Herod's plan. It says in verse 7, then Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, go and search diligently for the child. And when you have found him, bring me word that I too may come and worship him. All right. So Herod kind of makes this plan, right? Upon learning from the religious leaders that the Messiah is born in Bethlehem, he summons these wise men, right? It says secretly, which that's kind of like, okay, why are they summoning secretly? Gives that first suspicion of what's going on. Okay. And he kind of finds out from them, when did that star first appear, right? Because why does he want to know that? Because he kind of wants to know, how old is this kid? Like, when did this birth happen? Okay, which, like, well, why does he want to know that? See that later on. Okay. And then what? He sends them to Bethlehem and says, hey, go to Bethlehem, find this child and tell me where he is exactly, so then I can come worship him too. Right? Which on the surface might be like, oh, that's pretty cool. Like, Herod wants to worship him too. That's not what he wants to do, right? Because, again, knowing Herod, okay, not only because some of you are probably familiar with what comes later in chapter 2, right, where he Actually, we find out like he wants to kill this Messiah, right? He wants to kill this person. But even just knowing Herod's personality of like, again, he thought some of his sons were like potentially like working against him, so he killed them, right? Like he's super paranoid about any threat to his power. And so if he's hearing, hey, there's this new king that's been born, what do you think he wants to do? Do you think he really wants to worship him? No. If he really did, why wouldn't he just go with the wise men, right? Like, no, he wants to kill them, right? Like he wants to kill the Messiah, okay? And so this is his plan. This is his scheme. Okay, is to try to kind of use these wise men to kind of find out, kind of secretly find out this info so that he can act. Okay. All right. So then that takes us to the last part here, verses 9 through 12, where we see the wise men worship. Okay, so let's look at these verses 9 through 12. It says, after listening to the king, they went on their way. And behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. Then opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed in their own to their own country by another way. All right. So again, so you had Herod making his plan where he's like, okay, I'm going to find out where this kid is. I'm going to take him out. Okay. And so the wise men find out, okay, Bethlehem. All right, let's go. They start going. The star appears again, right? The star's there, which again makes me kind of think that it's like more like God's glory or something else, right? Maybe than a literal star. Okay. Because it comes to them. Seems to kind of almost like lead them, right? And everything. But notice, right, in verse 10, I love this, right? Notice this, like, notice their response. Notice the wise men's response to like seeing the star again. What does it say in verse 10? When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy, right? Essentially, right, like Matthew's trying to communicate, like they were just overwhelmed with joy, okay, at seeing the star. You can see that emotion in there, right? Where they are so excited. They're on the edge of their seat, right? To describe it as they rejoiced, not just they rejoiced, right? But they rejoiced exceedingly, and not just rejoiced exceedingly, but rejoiced exceedingly with great joy, right? That's like repeating. You rejoiced with joy, right? You're like, what does that mean? That's like you're at a loss for words to describe how excited someone is, okay? And that's these wise men. That's their response to like, yes, the star's back. Let's go, right? This is the one. This is the guy. We're there. We're going, okay? And they are so excited. In verse 11, they find the right house, right? The child is with Mary. And what? They fall down and worship him, right? They get there. They're so excited. They finally get there. And the first thing they do is fall down and worship. They pay homage to this new king, the king born, or the child born king of the Jews, right? Like they worship him, okay? And then they also give him gifts, right? Like as we talked about before, they give him the gold, frankincense, and myrrh, okay? And very valuable, precious gifts. And again, that's something else that people do a lot of speculation of like, ooh, the gold represents this, the frankincense represents this. Kind of like some bizarre things. I don't know. But probably more like they're just precious gifts that are very fitting of a king, okay? That they aren't just like little trinkets of stuff. It's like, no, these are like things that you would give a foreign king, right? When you're trying to pay homage to them, to make peace with them, right? And so they're giving this to Jesus, right? And some have suggested, I think this could be likely too, where you have like kind of you need gold to build a kingdom, right? Frankincense was potentially used to anoint new kings, and even myrrh was used in like the burial of kings, right? And so potentially that's what's going on, significance there. But safe to say, at the very least, right, like these are gifts fitting of a king, right? This isn't some light thing. This is like some good stuff, right? Like that they're giving Jesus, right? To again show that he is that true rightful king, okay? That's what's going on here. And after they worship, after they give these gifts, it says in verse 12 that they are warned in a dream not to return to Herod, right? Like Herod had his scheme, but God foiled it, right? Like, and so he warns them, hey, don't go back to Herod. And so they don't, right? They obey. They instead go back to their own country, and they go a different way than the way they came, right? Like go a different direction, right? To go back to their land, okay, to go back to their country. And so Herod, despite his kind of secret schemes, right? Like he fails, right? Like God foils that plan, okay? And we're going to see that even more clearly in the next couple sections here, all right, next week. But we see God working to preserve the life of Jesus, right? Like the Messiah, like Herod, you can't stop this, right? Like you can't stop him, okay? This is the true rightful king, and the fact they have wise men coming to worship him, that should be that indication, okay? So wrapping up, right, in the conclusion there, you have it on your sheet. We once again see Matthew pointing to the reality that Jesus is this true king of Israel, right? And you even see kind of this contrast between Jesus and Herod here a little bit, right? Where you see Herod is kind of troubled and even like intimidated a little bit by this, like this kid being born, okay? And then you have foreign officials coming to worship him rather than Herod, right? You have these foreign officials coming, bringing gifts, making peace, paying homage to Jesus, not Herod, right? Jesus is the true king, right? And even these foreign officials recognize it, right? And so that's significant here, okay? That's Matthew really making that clear. But you also see something which is kind of interesting here in this passage, where you see kind of this stark contrast in the reactions to the birth of Jesus between like the leadership of the Jewish people, right? The religious leaders even, and the foreign wise men, right? Where despite like their limited knowledge, right? The wise men's limited knowledge, they are eager and they're excited to come and worship the Messiah, right? They're like, hey, they come from hundreds of miles, right? Like they're coming from a foreign country. They get to Jerusalem. They're asking around like, hey, where is he? What's going on? We want to find him. Where is he? Kind of search him out. They find out where he is. They go, right? And they worship, right? They're there. They're eager. They're filled, like when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy, right? Like they're excited. They're eager. And this seems to stand in such stark contrast to the Jewish religious leaders who like they have the whole Old Testament. They knew, like when Herod asked, hey, where's this guy supposed to be born? They knew the answer, right? Bethlehem, right? They're familiar. They knew. And Matthew doesn't record this, so we don't know for sure, but it doesn't seem like there's much excitement there, right? Like it seems like the wise men just kind of go on their own, right? Like you would think these religious leaders would be way more excited and wanting to go and see for themselves this Messiah, okay? And even this fact, right? Like you had these wise men come from hundreds of miles away when Bethlehem and Jerusalem like aren't that far, right? Like you could go walk, it's not that far, right? And they don't even make that trip, right? And so you kind of have that picture, right, of just them having this kind of head knowledge of the scriptures. And that doesn't, like in a similar way, right? Like having that, like they had the head knowledge, they knew the answers, but that didn't lead to them actually like worshiping the actual Messiah, right? Worshiping Jesus. And kind of in a similar way, right? For us, like just having the head knowledge of scripture doesn't mean you actually know Jesus, right? Or have a relationship with him. Okay. And I think that's so significant here, where you see this response of worship by these wise men, right? That should be the response of Jesus to Jesus is worship. Eager, excited worship, not just apathy and kind of like, oh yeah, Jesus, okay, he's the Messiah, okay, that's cool. But no, like he is the Messiah. He is the Savior of the world, right? Like this is him and we should worship. Okay. And so kind of focusing on that side of it, you have a couple questions there. The first one is like, what is your response to Jesus? What is your response to Jesus, right? Do you really view him as the true king and respond in eager worship? Or do you have a response more like the Jewish religious leaders of that time, where you have some head knowledge about Jesus, but are more apathetic towards him? Okay, where you kind of hear these stories, you're like, oh yeah, I've heard of Jesus. Like, oh yeah, that's the Christmas story, different things. And Okay, move on, right? Give me something new, right? Or when you learn about Jesus, are you excited about that? Are you eager to worship him, to know more about him, to grow your relationship with him, right? I think like there is so much apathy, right? Like oftentimes when we talk about our relationship with Christ or our walk with the Lord, there is so much apathy where it is just kind of like it very much is just head knowledge, and we're not really enjoying our relationship with Christ. We just have this head knowledge of like, yeah, I kind of know like that's true or something, but like, does that like stir in your heart? Do you like actually care? Do you actually want to worship Jesus? Right? Because again, kind of like for the high schoolers, like we talked at summer camp, this is an all-in thing. Giving your life to Christ isn't just a 1 foot in, 1 foot out type of thing. You can't be kind of halfway in or half-heartedly following Jesus. It's an all-in. I want to serve him, right? Is that where you're at? Or you might like the religious leaders that kind of hear all this and like, cool, that's cool, and just kind of move on, right? And I guess another question that maybe we could discuss in small groups too is like, how do we remain excited about worshiping Jesus and combat being apathetic to our relationship with him, right? Like, because we want to be on guard of that. Like, we want to hopefully remain excited about our relationship with Christ and not grow apathetic or don't really like care, right? That's what apathy is, like not really caring. Okay, so and not really caring about our relationship with Jesus. So how do we guard ourselves from going down that path? Because I think it can be an easy path where, especially those of you who have like grown up in the church or been around for a while, you can kind of get into that rut where you're just kind of like, yeah, just kind of go through motions. I read my Bible sometimes, and kind of I've heard those stories and different things, right? Like I know that, but there's no excitement. There's no eagerness to like actually want to worship God. Okay. And I know like I don't know. I know that doesn't mean like we're not like always like I don't think that's like we're always excited. I think there's sometimes where we actually like have to fight through that apathy and really like I want to worship God even though I might not feel like it right now. I want to worship and we need to make those choices. But we also need to examine our lives to see like are you ever like excited about your relationship with God? With your relationship with Christ? Do you ever are you ever eager about that, or is it always like a chore or a burden to you to like come to group or read your Bible or pray, right? Like where are you at with that? And so examine your heart, right? And again, we're not just driven by emotion. I recognize that. Like I don't want to say like we just put on a happy smile all the time and like we're always happy, right? Like it's not always what it is. Okay, but hopefully we have that desire to have that relationship with Christ. And that is actually like we have some sort of excitement and eagerness to want to worship him. Okay. And so examine your heart, see where you're at, right, with all of this, and hopefully take that seriously. All right. So that wraps us up. Okay. So we're going to be transitioning into small groups. Okay. For high schoolers, I'll be sending out the links and info here shortly. And then junior hires, see you tomorrow night. All right. So see you guys in a little bit.